Welcome to our July novel night. Thank you so much for joining us here at Malvern Books. We're really pleased to see you all here for our mystery night. It should be a lot of fun hearing about both these books. So our first reader will be Mark Davis. Mark Davis was born and raised in Texas, studied at the University of Texas at Austin and Stanford University. For the last 20 years, he has worked as a business consultant. He is the co-author with Richard Torrenzano of Digital Assassination, Protecting Your Reputation, Brand, or Business Against Online Attacks, at St. Martin's Press. His op-eds have appeared in publications ranging from the Wall Street Journal to the Washington Post. Mark recently completed 2 epic science fiction novels, Darwin's Arrow and Bruno's Relic, now out on Kindle and Kindle Select. But tonight, he turns his focus to his father, Jada Davis, who wrote several noir and coming-of-age novels in the 1950s.
Thank you so much. It's great moving back to Austin. It's changed so much since I was here as a college student, and to see a great bookstore like this. It's an independent bookstore, and I'm really glad to be here and honored to be here. I'm representing my father. He was born in 1919. His father was born in the 1870s, who I got to know my grandfather a little bit. And in his day, there were he recounted to me the last of the raids of the Comanche against the settlers in his part of the country up in near Stephenville, that area. And so that's where my father grew up, and the lore of the West was still there, and all that. But he went on to become he was bitterly poor family. He often said that they didn't know that the Great Depression had actually occurred. What's different? But he made extra money writing articles for Collier's and magazines. He'd send them off and get a few dollars back, write little squibs and pieces. He was trained in desert warfare on the last Army Cavalry Division, and with Army logic, they took all these men who had been trained in desert warfare at horses and sent them to the Philippines. But he was unfortunately, many of the men he served with didn't make it. But he contracted tuberculosis and spent the duration of the war essentially giving himself a really good education. Then he went to the University of Texas. He worked as a newspaperman for many years. Was something of a crusading liberal, almost got himself killed a few times. And at that time had his own bookstore and wrote dime novels at a time when these, I think they're Ace and Golden Day, and there were a number of imprints then that no longer exist or really changed. But people would buy these novels for $10 cents, 15 cents, 25 cents. And a lot of writers, much like you see on the internet today, had kind of a thriving side practice, more than a hobby. They were making substantial money selling these novels. That all ended in 1959, and it ended with television. And when color TV came along, that market really got wiped out. And so my father had to make a decision then, continue to write, or really take that big gamble, or take the safe route. At that time, Random House was encouraging him to move to New York. They would help him get into maybe a master's program in writing at City College or Columbia, and introduce him to other writers and get him in an environment where he would be critiqued. And he also had an offer to become an executive with the Southwestern Bell Telephone Company. And he took the second offer. He took the safe route. And I think he did it for us. He figured that that would be a better life for his children than to take this gamble and go to New York and become a writer. But he was always kind of tinged with a little bit of sadness after that, I think. He puttered around with some novels during that period, but he never really had the time to focus on them. And while he was happy in his career, he never really got a chance to get back and get to that. But he did have his day, and I have 2 of his novels here. One of them is Midnight Road. Thanks to Stark House Press, which is an independent press, and the internet that can bring people together who have shared tastes. Their books are over there. His works are being republished, including one work that has never been published before, Midnight Road. Midnight Road is less in the noir theme that you find with Stark House Press It's more of a story, a coming-of-age story about a young boy, very violent story actually, in West Texas. And he has a dilemma. He has, his father's Bant is an alcoholic and mistreats him. And there's a family friend named Kenty, a man who's in the neighborhood, who comes back from travels. And Bant and Kenty were the best of friends, and the mother was a friend, and it slowly dawns on him, to his horror, that Kenty is his real father and Bant is not. And then mixed up in all of this is the abusive nature of how some families were raising children at a time. He's in love with a girl whose father, Old Trails, is a horribly abusive man. And so he's just caught up in this world of violence and jealousy and drinking out on, even though it's well into the turn of the century, it's really the frontier. It's a different world. So I'll read just a passage from this here, where the protagonist, his name is Jeff, comes home, or well, he goes to the home of Kenty to visit him, and he's seeing him more and more as it's slowly dawning on him who his real father is. The living room door opened and Bant stood there. The sight of him froze me, sent cold prickles up my spine, caused goosebumps to form, caused the hair on my neck to bristle. I couldn't run. He stood down looking into my face, stood unmoving. There was naked hatred glaring from his eyes. "What are you doing here, Jeff?" His voice was quiet. "I just came over to see Kenty." He just stood there and stared at me. There was no sound except the sound of wind and the pounding of my own heart. Finally, he moved forward and I edged back toward the steps. "Next time I tell you to stay home, you'll believe me, mind me." And he walked around me and he went into the yard, and I was ready to follow him or run, blind with terror. "Don't run, Jeff. It'll go hard on you if you run." "What are you doing here, Bant? Where's Kenny? What have you done to Kenny? And why are you in this house? Stop your babbling. Kenny's in town." He walked across the yard and cut a long switch from a hackberry tree. The switch was as long as his arm and big around as his thumb. He cut twigs from it and tested it, flicking it until it whistled as the air cut. "Don't whip me with that thing, Bant. I think you're drunk, and I don't think you're my real paw. You don't have the right." The switch lashed and cut the backs of my leg like fire, hitting the side of my left leg and curled back to the back of both legs. I backed away as he raised the switch, hoping to catch it, and wrested from him. The switch came faster than sight and hit me in the side, curled around my ribs, and burned like molten fire. "I'll kill you, Bant," I screamed, falling backwards. "So help me, I'll kill you." I tried to fight back, swung and flailed at him, but he had me dancing as the switch went thwack, again thwack, and then again thwack, 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 until it was hard to tell whether the sound was greater, more hurtful than the pain. I screamed. I couldn't hear my own screams. I cursed myself for screaming and dancing, but I jumped and danced and screamed and could not run to escape the switch. Now it was cutting my back and now cutting my legs, and once I was caught in my hands and held only the stinging pain. Alive it seemed, vengeful and alive, fiery hot on my shoulders and buttocks and sides and thighs, coursing from ankles to neck. All I could see was Bant's face, a twisting, snarling face. Once to my shame, I went to my knees to beg, but the cutting, slashing blows still rained. And then there's another passage that it ends. I lay on my bed on my stomach and wondered whether honor my father applied to Bant. To Kenny, neither or both. I'll kill Bant, I'll go to hell, I thought. That's the kind of, I think that comes from his upbringing. I hate to say it, he was the next to last of 11 children. The name Jada comes from the jazz song, Jada, Jada, Jing, Jing, Jay. His parents were on one level kind of sweet, but I'm sure that they punished him, as many people did back in those days. The other work is very different. This is a Western that's set in a West Texas oil town, a boom town. It's in the 1940s. The first TVs are appearing. There's some rich people with big Cadillacs, and there's a small town that's beginning to explode. And there's a man named Willow Reed. His parents misspelled his name on the birth certificate, so he has a girl's name, something he's very sensitive about. He's a con man. He's a hard case. He's a bank robber, and he's riding on the rails, and he sees this town. He realizes here's money, and within a day or two, he makes a deal with the crooked mayor to become the police chief. And now he's robbing, the police chief is robbing the banks. And he has a compatriot, a gentleman named, well, he's called Baldy here, and an elderly man that he meets who's a good safecracker. And so they're working it at night, but he's getting in trouble because he's taking too much money out of the town, and people really, he's getting pressure. What are you going to do about this? So here's what he does. Willis Reed's gun jumped in his hand again, and Baldy's body jerked and twitched and began to crumple. Even as he fell, his gun fired, and Reed flinched as a bullet hit and shattered the glass of the door behind him. Baldy fell face down, arms outspread, still. A feeling of loneliness, a feeling of despondency swept like a cold breeze over Willow Reed. He felt numb, tired, almost afraid, and lonely. So alone, lonely. Baldy had been a friend and went past for a friend. And he'd been complaining about the split, and he'd been carrying a gun. Maybe always he'd carried a gun. Well, why shouldn't he? Fear was grasping, clammy. Voices clanging and monotonous spoke inside his mind. Gotta move fast, gotta move fast, move fast, move fast, gotta move fast. His pulse was hard and fast. His breath seemed to sing and wheeze and sing in dreadful and rhythmic cadence as he picked up the parcel and headed for the back of the building. It took a long time to slide through the window, and once outside he could see but dimly. He trotted across a junk-strewn lot and stopped beside a gas meter. His wildly groping hands found the lid of a sunken water shutoff. He lifted the lid and set it aside, falling his knees and stuffing the parcel in the hole. Swiftly but quietly, he replaced the lid and hurried back across the parking lot. He climbed in through the window, found the iron bar he used to jimmy the window on the floor. He wiped it with his handkerchief. Breathing hard, fighting the voices in his brain, he walked to the front of the building. Once more, he drew his gun from the holster beneath his coat. Facing the back of the building, he fired 3 times. Glass shattered and tinkled. He reholstered the gun. He went to the office where Baldy lay, stepped across the body, picked up the telephone. He dialed police headquarters. Drake, Willow Reed, listen. I'm at the Johnson Tool Company, yeah, West Main. I got one of those safecrackers, but the other one got away. Sent out an alarm. What? Yeah, he's dead, I think. I might have clipped the other one, but I'm not sure. Check with the hospital and all the doctors in the books. Okay, I'll stay here. He hung up. His legs trembled and muscles jumped. He felt shaky all over, and his stomach was queasy. And so this is a very hard-boiled kind of noir fiction that was so typical of that era. I think what distinguishes it, though, is that the view of the town, it's almost kind of like an evil Our Town. He has moments where everyone's looking in the mirror or drinking coffee or something, and what's going on inside their heads, it's unbelievable. He had a very, very disturbing take on the power structures in the city, the people who wanted to be mayor, anybody could be mayor. Who wanted to be mayor? Who wanted to be the police chief? Who wanted to take these jobs? And it tended to gravitate toward people who had sinister motives and who were just ripping the town off right and left. And I think that probably came from his newspaper experience. He was a newspaper reporter at a time when there would be a crime, and he suspected the police in some cases. And they would go and find a victim, someone with an appropriate complexion who they could take downtown and beat into a confession. And he confronted them about that, and almost, he got taken for a ride himself a couple times and almost got killed. And so I think that's kicking around in the background here. So anyway, that's all I have to tell you. Is there any questions or comments?
When did your father stop writing novels?
In about 1960, and he wrote a few novels afterwards, but they never really were completed, and I don't think he was really able to give them his full attention. So this really reflects the 40s and the 50s in his writing.
Definitely cool.
And that kind of hard-boiled, hard-hitting.
Yeah, genre too. I love that genre thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you have any idea of any of his influences or who he was reading back, like Earl Stanley Gardner or anybody from that time? Is there anyone
That's an interesting question. He was accused of imitating Hemingway because he would have these, like, being a bad imitation of Hemingway, had these long sentences and short sentences. and he had an aversion to Hemingway just because he didn't like the man. He didn't read his books. He said, I don't know if it's like him or not. So I think he was kind of steeped in the Mickey Spillane
Okay.
kind of influence. I think that would be an influence. But there were some literary influences too. He read deeply when he was in the hospital for those 4 years during the war. So I think that had an influence.
You mentioned that he had more than just these 2 novels. Has Starkhouse approached you about doing any of the other ones?
There's one other that we talked about. They're on the fence about that one. It's about it's about a small town where there's a Quaker-like denomination that won't go to the war, and they're being beaten up and persecuted by the townspeople. And of course, there's the crusading newspaper man. You know. The covers, he's got an apron on, you know, newspaper apron, you know, with the print and ink, and he's like fighting the crowd. But I don't think they're enthusiastic about that one. So this may be it. I don't know. Yes.
Anything else?
I was just wondering, have you taken up kind of where your father was left off anywhere? Are you interested in writing?
I am. I've thrown I've thrown the first of 2 science fiction books out there on Kindle, and we'll look for a publisher at some point. I enjoy it. It's a hobby of mine. I don't think that I'm terribly influenced by my father. I'm influenced by the practice of writing, and in the corporate life, he was a writer and he wrote a lot for business. And just seeing him at the act of a typewriter, I think, had a big influence on me. But in terms of his writing, I would like to see actually One for Hell turned into a movie. I think it'd be the idea of a Western set in a West Texas town with televisions, you know, this kind of, I think that's something that hasn't really been done. But I was not, no, I don't think I'm terribly influenced by it as a writer. Anything else? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.